Yes, sure. Since the mid 1990s, there have been many studies on the effectiveness of different bases of social power in buyer supplier relationships. These studies have consistently found the positive influence, which includes expert, reference, and legitimate powers. But there have been some inconsistencies in terms of theorization and empirical findings of the effects of reward and coercive powers. They are uh, mediated powers. So we applied a social psychology theory called cognitive evaluation theory to better explain and clarify the roles of reward and coercive powers in the buyer-supplier relationships. Also, we try to find the context where the effects of reward and coercive powers can be strengthened or weakened so that we can provide some explanations for the previous inconsistent findings. We also focused on the influence of buyer power on supplier relationship commitments because relationship commitment is a key building block for developing deeper buyer supplier relationships and improving supply chain performance. Yes, CET focuses on the social and environmental factors that facilitate or undermine intrinsic motivation. The theory argues that people have fundamental needs for autonomy and competence, and if the external factors related to task uh, promote perceived autonomy and competence, people are intrinsically motivated to perform the task. Previously, some key studies on power in supply chains theorized that both reward and coercive powers would have positive impacts on instrumental relationship commitments, which is extrinsic, but negative impacts on normative relationship commitments, which is intrinsic and considered as genuine relationship commitments. So, building on CET, we theorize that reward power can influence this intrinsic relationship commitment positively if the use of power promotes the perceived competence of the supplier and do not undermine the perceived autonomy. So that's how try to link CET with the context of buyer-supplier relations. We collected survey data from multiple countries and industries as well. To measure the concepts such as different bases of power and relationship commitments, we adopted the survey instruments that are used in previously published papers. We also employed confirmatory factor analysis to make sure that measurements are reliably measuring the intended concepts. For testing our hypothesis, we employed multi-level regression. Since our data are collected from multiple countries, we had to control for some unobserved differences across the countries. Also, we wanted to check whether the effects of reward and coercive powers vary across the countries. So, and multi-level regression was good for these purposes. Non-mediated powers are very important. Many studies have consistently found that they can improve long-term buyer-supplier relationships. Our study also highlights the importance of non-mediated powers, but even further, by finding that they can be influential contexts where reward and coercive powers operate. We found that when the buying firm has high non-mediated powers, the positive effect of reward power is even more positive, and the negative effect of coercive powers is even more negative. So we found non-mediated powers are the moderators for the relationship. Yes, our finding of the positive influence of reward power is particularly useful for managers because this is the power that companies can actually control. Non-mediated powers are effective, but it takes a long time and significant efforts to develop them, so they cannot be controlled as the company. We also found that reward power can reduce the negative impact of coercive power. We suggest supply managers to consider the competence enhancing role of reward power and the autonomy and competence destroying role of coercive power to better motivate suppliers. And additionally, understanding the moderating role of non-mediated powers will be useful for managers as well. The influence of reward and coercive powers can be enhanced or aggravated depending on the levels of non-mediated powers. Especially for companies with high non-mediated powers, managers should consider combining them with rewards, but refrain from using coercive power. Yeah, for future research, although we found a generally positive effect on reward power on supplier relationship commitment, we acknowledge that reward power has a lot of limitations in developing buyer-supplier relationships. Depending on how buying companies use reward power, it can also negatively influence buyer-supplier relationships. So identifying more detailed conditions for positive or negative effect of reward power can be an interesting future research. And also investigating cultural differences in using and perceiving powers in supply chains could be interesting. Maybe due to small number of countries where we collected data, we did not find significant cultural differences in the effects of power. So theorizing and empirically showing the cultural difference in the effects of power in multiple supply chain settings will certainly contribute to this stream of research.